Hey everybody, nice to see you. Congratulations to Catherine and Frumi. I mean, having an annual conference year after year, not everybody pulls that off. And having it in a location this beautiful, that's really rare for me. I go to a lot of conferences. Yes, I'm a conference slut. And I gotta say, this one is different in a number of ways. First of all, you don't usually have, you know, the tennis, hockey, archery option on breaks. You don't usually have this view outside the window, and you definitely don't usually have this set of clothing. I must say, this is the single most casually dressed conference I have ever been to. Thank God! It feels like home. I have to make one correction in my introduction, which is I'm actually not really a musician. A theater background, and I work with lots of music organizations, but I myself have no music background, although a tiny music background, which I will confess, only here in a state where we dress like this at conferences. I was in a high school rock band, which died a very fortunate early death because, and I am not kidding you, the name of my high school rock band was Moby Dick and the Seamen. Thank God. Thank God I didn't have to live with that for the rest of my life. A youthful indiscretion. So, in this chunk of time, I want to address the topic that I titled this speech, but it really gives me a chance to zero in on a few of the kind of key things that matter the most to me. But I want to start it off with actually the personal story behind the conclusions of this speech, which is that about 6 years ago, after, like you, a lifetime of hard work in the arts education field, I was finding myself absolutely frustrated. I was discouraged by beating my head against the same walls. I was tired of hearing the same debates within our field. I thought if I heard one more discussion about arts for intrinsic purposes versus arts for, you know, instrumental purposes, I thought I would scream. And I was beginning to look at, you know, turning 60 and thinking, my God, it's going to be like this for the rest of my life. I'm going to die in the middle of these fruitless debates unless I do something. So what I decided to do was take a sabbatical. A very expensive proposition for a freelance person, and I was going to just stop until I was clear about what I wanted to do when I came back, till I was clear about the direction for the next chapter of my life. And so the deal was I wasn't coming back until I knew, and it took 2 years. And during those 2 years, I actually had 6 months of solitude because I found even my own thinking had become so kind of put into ruts and tracks that I had to refresh my own ways of thinking about art and how people learn and how it connects to the human spirit. And after those 6 months, I began to have some traveling adventures to learn and had an extraordinary experience teaching in rural Tanzania and discovering a whole different experience of what arts can be in the life of a community. And I went to Venezuela and explored El Sistema, which proved to be the single most significant, most mind-boggling thing I had ever encountered in my life. And I began to work just around the periphery of some very innovative projects around the US. And slowly, the kind of key ideas that mattered enough to me to kind of put my chips on them for the last chapter of my work life got clear enough that I came back. So I've been back a couple of years now, and I'm dangerous because I am newly clear and kind of relaxed about the kind of institutional ways of thinking and habitual channels of thought that had conditioned my thinking for so long. So what I want to share with you is kind of the core set of things that now I know are the most important things for us to remember and stand firmly upon in our arts learning experimentation, and which I'm going to encourage, and the everyday practices, the priorities of our everyday practices. I find people in arts education are really good at pouring out 50 things that are important about our work. And we're not so good at distilling the 3 things or the 5 things that are our power ideas. I'm going to encourage our thinking that way because I've discovered that being able to pour out as an advocate 50 great ideas is unfortunately a lot weaker than investing in 3 ideas that hold what you know. And there's one other idea that came clearer and clearer in my time away, which comes from the 20th century physicist David Bohm. And he said, anytime you see seeming polarities, look for the greater truth that contains them both. And anytime I now come across these polarities within our field, or the idiocies that separate arts practice from arts education, or one discipline from another, I am looking for the greater truth that contains them both. So indeed, the 5 ideas I'm going to present today apply as, I hope, as potently if you're, running an arts center, as it does if you're working in an arts education program. These are the power tools of art, and they apply beyond the separate silos. Indeed, that's one of the things I've begun to notice that's moving in our field. You may have felt it too. The silos are coming down. Of necessity. All the ways in which we've defined ourselves and contained our conversations and consequently limited our power, they're beginning to fragment, and conversations are starting to happen cross-sector. They're tentative, they're nervous because they're first conversations, but they are the future. And boy, partnering is really growing around the country. I swear it's like a Reverend Moon marriage ceremony out there with all the partnering that's going on. And we're developing partnering skills because it is our future. And that partnering is not just, arts institutions with arts education programs. It's partnering between arts learning and social service. It's partnering between art museums and medical schools. That's the direction we're tending to, and indeed, it is those outside agencies that suddenly are discovering just how powerful we are and how much we know. And believe me, it's thrilling to have medical doctors and scientists shake their heads and go, oh my God, why didn't we ever know this before? Where have you been? I'll just give you one example. It began in Boston, I guess about 7 years ago, a partnership between Harvard Medical School and the Gardner Museum and later Museum of Fine Arts, where they began to train doctors in training in how to look at modern art and just any old paintings, and by training them in how you actually look, how you decode, how you relate to works of art, the skill of observing translated directly to their diagnostic practice, and they became measurably more accurate in medical diagnosis. Art saves lives, as statistically verified by Harvard researchers, and within 3 years, there are 17 partnerships between medical schools and art museums around the US. This is one of the directions we're heading, where we're taking what we know and distilling it into languages and practices that have a different kind of resonance of value in the wider world and not just amongst ourselves. So the 5 ideas that I clearly am hyping extensively now apply broadly. They should apply in that medical school program as much as they should apply in a 3rd grade classroom when we're working with kids. And the first of these ideas shouldn't surprise you. I'm actually redefining art. I'm taking it out of the definition that it is what happens in our special buildings, that it is about artworks, and that it is a special practice, sort of the privileged way of thinking about art for the last 50 years. And I'm returning it to the inclusive, broader definition of art that has done very well for the previous 300,000 years. Thank you very much. The arts have allowed themselves to become, or did allow themselves to become, the province of the art club. The 7% of Americans who have a background in the arts and speak arts languages and feel comfortable in the buildings. Meanwhile, there's this other whole life of the arts that doesn't really call itself arts, but is doing just fine, thank you. And that's why I redefine arts to mean make stuff you care about. As simple as that. And I don't care what medium you're making it in. There becomes a moment when you are investing yourself in any medium and making stuff that matters to you, when you slip into the verbs of art, even when you don't have your hands on artistic media. And indeed, we know it's the verbs of art that matter to arts educators, because a kid can have her hands on clay all day long and not have an arts experience. She has to be able to do something with that opportunity of clay. She has to be able to pour some set of personal verbs into this opportunity. Has to begin to matter to her. It has to begin to hold something of her for her to transform this opportunity into this realm that we call art. And those same verbs can apply to, as I say, bricklaying, when you slip into the art of bricklaying. And, God bless us, when one gets practiced in that, you can also pour it into the 5-paragraph essay. One of the deadliest forms ever created by humankind. But a passionate, art-spirited person can look at that 5-paragraph essay and go, I can make something here. I can turn this dead form into something kind of interesting. Watch me do it. That is the invested learner whose, academic scores go up, fine, but in fact, who brings the irrepressible impulse to make stuff she cares about, and the corollary skill to have the courage to share it with others in belief that they will find it of value. Those two simple, funky acts are fundamental redefinitions of art. And what is our role? I got a new job title for you. It's the same job title that everybody in the arts has, whether educator, whether janitor, whether usher in an opera house. Here's your new job title. And in fact, if you were wearing suits, I would make you take out your business card and scratch out the little line on it that says Marketing Director, San Francisco Symphony, and write in your new job title, because we all have the same one, which is Agent of Artistic Experience. That's our job. Every single one of us is to use our angles of agency to bring people into these verbs of art, where they are making stuff they care about. The thing they are making might be a personally relevant connection to that opera. The thing they might be making is a bowl that is her identity. Or it might be a new connection, a new idea. That is art, and artistic media happen to hold and reward that act better than anything else humankind has come up with. That's what's special about the arts. Artistic media are incredibly eloquent, deep, resonant, but they are not the exclusive domain of creativity and artistry. They're just the high point we've come up with. But boy, when I work with high-tech metallurgical engineers, they don't give two damns about opera, but they care desperately about the quality of making stuff they care about with high-tech metals that can do amazing things in the world. So that's our first essential, core essential of awakening creativity, is to know what we're working for, and it is artistry, human artistic verbs that every one of us has that is diabolically squelched by almost every institution we function within, and that desperately wants our intervention to reawaken it. The number one gig I'm asked to do in the business world is creativity, Eric, but no art. You know, creativity, high advantage. You know, oh yeah, let's give us a competitive edge, we'll produce lots of new innovations, but please, don't goop it up with all the touchy-feely crap that, you know, just makes us embarrassed, okay? That's really the number one gig, and that's really how they feel about it. There's some small percentage of business people that are, we love, because they, quote, get it. But there's a way bigger percentage that want those verbs of artistry, but don't want it all gooped up with our usual vocabulary, and it doesn't require that usual vocabulary. I'll give you an example. I had a half-day workshop with the board of directors of Federal Express, and they wanted creativity, but no art. No problem. They pay great. I'm going to do this workshop. So I know my client. So we begin with a very fast exercise where they're gathering words and reorganizing them in this very intricate kind of pattern. And then I made them go back and reorganize the words. And they did a third reorganization based on a personal experience they had once had. And they're actually going through this final step, noticing they're creating something that looks suspiciously like a poem, but it's too late. They were engaged in the task and had to complete it the way artists had to. So sure enough, we completed these, never used an art word, never called them poems. We completed it, and of course, who they are, they insisted on hearing everybody's around the table, and then my judging which was the best, which was a perfect opportunity to create a rubric for judging quality in this particular task, which we took the time to do, and in fact, they then applied their quality rubric for this particular task. We spent the whole morning exquisitely involved in art making, never using a word of art, and they felt completely satisfied that they had gotten what they wanted. They, in fact, were creatively invigorated, and we applied it to the rest of their work. We have these powers, it's just we haven't started understanding them, articulating them, distilling them in the way that others can hear. I would like to do a quick exercise just to remind us of one of these verbs, a specific exercise. You get a gold star if you actually write down answers on paper, but you can do it in your head. It works better if you actually write stuff down on paper. So, or you could, you know, electronic people, you can do that too. So here's the exercise. It's part of a body of work. Do you have like a website I can post things after? Okay, I wrote an article about this and I'll kind of put it up on the website. It's the body of work I do, this body is called isotonic instruction. And it's about taking a particular skill of creativity and like one of those machines at the gym that works just one very specific muscle but repeatedly and fast, it's a way of developing creative capacity in young people in chunks of time that instead of 40-minute blocks of time, an impossible currency in school structure, it actually is developed in 1-minute blocks of time, twice a day, 5 days a week, every day of the school year. So it's a way to infuse creative development without having to assess it, without having to proclaim it in a curriculum, but to really bring its vitality in. So here's our 1-minute exercise, and then we'll take another minute or two to unpack it. I'm going to give you a timed 60-second exercise. And your challenge is to write down as many answers that fit this challenge as you can think of. And we're looking for quantity more than quality. As many as you can in 60 seconds. And here is the assignment. Would you write down in 60 seconds, and I'll give you time warnings, all the ways in which the animal, a mouse, not like a computer mouse, the animal, a mouse, and a refrigerator are the same. Go. The verbs of art in creativity, and man, does the rest of the world want that. And when we get good at developing people's capacity, and more than just capacity, their pleasure in multiplicity, instead of the aggressive single right answerness of American education, to introduce in, and it only takes a minute twice a day to begin to introduce the pleasure, the fun, the play of multiple thinking, of generating many ideas. Boy, is that a powerful contribution to education and to creativity wherever it appears. Item number 2, let me quote a line from the Harvard Project Zero study, The Qualities of Quality, and see how you would finish it. By far and away, the single most important determinant of quality in arts education is, we should know this, right? If Harvard Project Zero did a major study and says there is one thing that is way more important than everything else in determining quality in arts education, like, we ought to know what that is, right? So how would you finish this sentence? You don't have to fess up. By far and away, the single most important determinant of quality in arts education is, just think about it. Maybe write it down for future embarrassment. And their answer was the motivation of the learner. The highly motivated, intrinsically motivated learner can take almost any pedagogical opportunity and turn it into creative gold. The under-motivated learner, or extrinsically motivated learner, can take the world's best pedagogy and turn it into mud. The most important focus for us is the intrinsic motivation of the learner. And I swear, since I've come back to work, it's as if that is most of my energy, is reminding people of the importance of that idea, of applying what we know about nurturing intrinsic motivation in people. And once we get sharpened on that, and remember our acts of agency toward waking up people's wish to make stuff they care about, and creating environments that support their doing that, we start to get really powerful across education. And I mean across education, not just within schools. That is a high value tool. And indeed, if you know the book Drive by Daniel Pink, in which he writes a whole book about what research tells us about exactly this capacity. What does research tell us about nurturing intrinsic motivation, which he calls drive, in humans? Very few of his examples in that book come from the arts or arts education. It's all business and social science. And we are the designated place to develop that capacity in young people and to enable them to feel the pleasure of it. We're one of the few places in a common curriculum that is allowed to do that work. Almost every other section of a common curriculum is designed to squelch exactly that impulse. And here we are invited, explicitly or implicitly, to develop the intrinsic motivation muscle that turns into high-quality work. And not just high-quality work in arts education. Once it is internalized, intrinsic motivation insists on high-quality work everywhere it pours itself. And as Daniel Pink points out, throughout business with bottom-line results that mean businesses do better. There's another sentence in that Harvard Project Zero report that says, and the second greatest determinant of quality in arts education is, how would you feel in that one? Is the social context around the learner. So if the individual's intrinsic motivation is the most important, peer influence and environment is second most important. Notice both are way more important than pedagogy. A huge proportion of our pedagogical influence is creating learning environments that are paradoxically safe and charged at the same time. It's this marvelous hybrid atmosphere that good arts educators are able to bring into the room fairly quickly. that it is safe enough so kids can engage in the acts of courage that let them invest themselves in making stuff. It's hard and that might be embarrassing. And the trust that they can do it in front of their peers and with their peers, and then people outside might actually be interested and value what they've made. Much of our influence, perhaps more than our pedagogy, is the capacity to create those external environments that let them internalize those environments. So it's important that we remember those priorities in our work. It's more important than cool activities to have activities that enable the learner to make stuff she cares about and create an environment around her that in fact supports her acts of courage. Of course, the difficulty of this is you can't make someone make something they care about. You can create conducive environments and many kinds of courage, many kinds of encouragements, but it's this internal act of courage, how easy it would be if in fact we could just make people do it. Tell them how great it is and they'll try it because we told them to, and they will have life transformative experiences. People aren't wired like that, unfortunately. So our job is to be thinking all the avenues of agency we have to create those environments and irresistible invitations to get the feel for it so they get the pleasure of that act and follow and want more because it feels so good. So that's our second unforgettable, is to focus on intrinsic motivation and creating the environments that support it. Third, let's do a little exercise for this one. Would you imagine that this wall up here, everything you kind of see from, let's say, here forward, is the back wall of a stage set. You have plunked down your $28.50 for a ticket to this theater event, and you're waiting for the show to start, and you're looking at the stage set. You know, scenic designers, there is not one thing up here that is not intentionally placed. Every single thing has been meticulously made to be exactly like it is for some purpose to do with the play. So, as you're waiting for this play to start, looking at the set, what do you see up here, actual stuff that's up here, that gives you a hint about what kind of play it's going to be? So with me, look and see what you can figure out about the kind of show it's going to be. Are you dreading that you have misspent your $28.50? What do you notice up here that gives you hints about the play? What do you see?
The knots in the wood.
What do knots in the wood suggest? What is that hint about the qualities in the play?
Country setting.
Country setting, a little on the funky side, because that's the cheaper lumber. Right? What else do you see?
Screen.
Screen. What does screen suggest? Big screen.
Movie.
Upstage center. There's going to be a movie. So at least if the play is boring, maybe there'll be some visually interesting elements to it. But it does make you wonder, okay, so they're going to use multimedia in here. I wonder what that's going to be. What else do you see?
Windows to the outside.
Windows to the outside. Over here, stage right. Is something different going to happen over in the stage right area than the action over here in the stage left area? What are you starting to get a feel for the two different stage areas that's going to happen in this play? Light and dark. Oh, light and dark. Maybe some relating to the pastoral here. Looks awfully instructional over on this. And oh God, do we have to? Other specific little things you notice.
Well, I'm excited to see if this is a costume or a musical instrument.
This thing.
A large metal thing.
Yeah. Look at this thing. A gigantic metal something off right on the... Is this like a robot that starts walking in? We don't know. Let me just pause us for a moment. Notice how you were looking at this space in the last 2 minutes compared to the previous 45. All I did was give you the world's smallest arts invitation, what if? And notice the change in the quality of your attending. What had gone from what we usually call paying attention, which is, as researchers tell us, using about 5% of your cognitive capacity, doing all that stuff we do in there while we pay attention, you know, thinking about lunch and the drive home and what, you know, my God, look at his sneakers, whatever it is you're checking out, while you pay attention, versus the more invested attention when I invite you to play with me, to see if you can make stuff with me, if you can decode, explore the way those doctors do when they are in training with the art museum, to begin to see what's really there, to develop habits that I will call of aesthetic attention. It is noticing what is there in the way that is poised to make stuff with it, to perceive it as having potential value or potential meaning. The way a doctor who looks at a rash can either go, oh, you've got this, or can really look at it and begin to take you toward a more accurate diagnosis to save a life. Aesthetic attention. It is a different kind of attending than we invite young people to do in schooling, and it's, boy, the attending we want when people come to arts buildings. Americans aren't naturally in the habit of using aesthetic attention. In fact, we have it pretty much squeezed out of us by the, the kind of entertainment gratification habits of our culture. And aesthetic. Yeah, exactly. John Dewey was once asked if he could define what aesthetic means, and he said, I can't define aesthetic, but I know its opposite is anesthetic. So we are, in fact, invited into active, alive, awake paying attention, which, as you know, is a sine qua non for learning, attending to the many things that are offered to you with an interest in what they might contain, as opposed to the passive, half-attending habits that we're developed into, that if in fact it's not coming all the way over to gratify interest and pleasure me, I'm really not going to bother. As opposed to something as stupid as, what kind of a play could this be? And starting to notice the knots in the wood, and how long has it been since you have thought about the meaning of knots in wood and the implications, the socioeconomic implications of knots in pine? Suddenly that is the active engagement of a human in just the acts of observation. So that is the third essential element, and I see it widely. Dramatic moments, the shape of things. As you were saying, how do you begin the class? How do you end the class? How do you bring closure to the parts of a class? How do you attend to the transitions so they're inherently interesting and appreciated by the students? How do you invite students to make meaning out of the shapes of a classroom experience? Aesthetics across the curriculum without changing bupkis about the curriculum, just heighten the quality of attending. And there's a big challenge. This is not one of the 5, but I'll put it up here anyway because it's one of the biggies. Wait, I should actually catch up here. So the second one is intrinsic motivation. And then the next one is aesthetic attention. And here comes the new one that isn't really one. It is the law of 80%. The law of 80%. I call it a law because it makes it sound important. And the number 80% is a made-up statistic. But the law of 80% captures an actual truth, which is this, and you know it from your own experience. 80% of what you teach is who you are. 80% of what you teach is who you are. You are teaching aesthetic attention in the way you aesthetically attend within the classroom. What you notice, how you formulate questions, how new sentences are made, the way you hear a student's answer and elicit the kernel of intelligence in it, the way we embody intrinsic motivation, aesthetic attention, and a redefined expansion of what art means is the way in which students learn these from us. If you doubt the law of 80%, think of the great teachers in your own life. It was not the syllabus, the handouts, the intelligent curriculum that made you decide to redirect the trajectory of your life. It was the quality of that person in the room, listening, making sense in front of your eyes that made you say, I want that. I want those experiences. That is the law of 80%, and it is 80% because it's more important than the 20% that is our curriculum, our syllabus, our good pedagogy, and that demands that we keep strong in our expanded definition of art, that we are intrinsically motivated to teach, even though we're in institutions that are aggressively brutal to that impulse. We cannot afford to succumb to compliance and to just doing it because I can't stand another planning session, because students learn from us from the quality of our motivation to teach this lesson in this moment. That's where they learn what it means, and for us to apply this attention. The fourth item on our list is reflection. And the reason I include it is because I think it is the single most overlooked essential component of arts learning. I'll write it up here. John Dewey told us in no uncertain terms, if you do not reflect on your experiences, you do not learn from them. Reflection is not the 2-minute discussion at the end of a class that you usually run out of time for. Not good enough. Learners require reflective pauses adjacent to their significant experiences in order for them to scan that experience and precipitate out those few things that that individual needs to hold. Whether it's a feeling, or a process of coming up with mouse refrigerator analogies that is my process, whether it's an idea or a memory, we need to be invited into the regular practice of reflecting on these rich experiences we have in the arts, or they're gone. And since we live in an aggressively anti-reflective culture, we're basically doing remedial work in reflective skills, and we have to take on that mantle because, as John Dewey told us, it is essential for a learner to actually gain what she can from the rich learning experiences we bring in the arts, for her to hold them, take them away, and eventually, with repetition, transfer them to other parts of her life. She needs reflective capacities. She needs a feel for the value, the pleasures of reflection. And not just take out your journal and write some notes kind of reflection, multiple modalities of reflection, so that her strengths are affirmed, so that she reflects in the many ways that humans do and finds the ones that really are powerful for her. But we can't stint this. It's just too important for us, for all of us. I'm coming up to the fifth one now, and as you can tell, we're heading towards a fabulous inspirational finish.
I hope we have time to reflect.
Well, if you notice, thank you for that setup, we've been reflecting along the way. If you notice, I have invited you periodically to pause and look at a different angle. We looked at our process for coming up with the mouse in the refrigerator. So we engaged in the creative activity, then we looked at how we engaged in the creative activity. We engaged in the creative activity, we paused and noticed how we went about that and unpacked what is the significance of that. I consider those reflective activities, reflective invitations, because they invite you to scan your experience, notice what is sticky for you, what is of value for you, and somehow just hold it a little bit more. We could have been more aggressive, it's true. We could have had you writing stuff down, and maybe John will provide us more reflective opportunities. I think we could be designed into the ultimate in reflective activities in the subsequent hour here. But it's important to note that you may not have thought you were doing reflective activities, because I didn't say take out your journal, but I invited you into the actual activities of reflection, which are, look at the etymology of the word reflect, is to bend back toward. To take your experience, bend it back toward yourself, and just pull out those things that matter to you a little bit more to remember before we move on. And that's why reflective buffers or encounters or bumpers belong throughout our activities. Every time something juicy has happened, add in that reflective opportunity to build it in as a habit of mind. One of the really obvious things in my coming back to this work after 2 years away is a really basic thing that is true both of humans and paramecia. The full range of life forms adheres to this truth, and paramecia probably function based on it better than humans do, which is we move toward that which feels good. We function on the pleasure principle. That in fact, that which feels good to do, in the 100 subtle ways that we find things feeling good, we move toward that a little bit. And it makes us a little bit more inclined to engage in that kind of activity again. This is not something we say to school boards, but arts education is based in the pleasure principle. That's probably not an advocacy angle to take. However, it's how humans work. And one of the skillful things that good arts educators do is they break down complex tasks into scaffolded stages so that in fact you intensify the pleasure. As shoulds start appearing in the work, people start backing away from it. You know what happens when you should on people. People need to move into something because they sense there's something in it for them. They've had a past experience, they've done the first step of an exercise and it went okay, makes them more inclined for the next step, makes them more inclined for the next step. People scaffold their way into the courage of artistic engagement in any medium. What this requires us to do, and that we naturally are pretty darn good at, is scaffolding activities to maximize the satisfaction, the sense of completion at every single step. As students start to fall off toward compliance, they will do what we ask, but they will not be engaging artistically. That's one of the things psychologists of creativity have taught us for sure, is that people creatively engage only under intrinsically motivated circumstances. They'll make stuff for you, they'll manufacture things, they'll comply, they'll do whatever you want, but they gotta be going for something they want before they will slip into creatively making stuff they care about. We have to remember to actually use our most potent weapon: fun, pleasure, sense of success, sense of individual agency, rather than relying on the conveniences of compliance in order to accomplish what we need, which is tapping the creative potential of all people. And I think everybody in this room believes all people have got it. Gonna write the word joy as our fifth. To remember joy. I had an experience recently. I've become very involved in helping El Sistema, the Venezuelan music education system, grow in the US and around the world. And I went to Japan, where they were starting Sistema Japan. And what I couldn't understand before I arrived was, I said, Japan? No poverty, and the world's best music education, what the heck do they need El Sistema for? They're already there. And when I arrived, I found that their first site was in Fukushima, where the disasters had created traumatized young people, and the educators there recognized that the music education, excellent as it was was not addressing the internal trauma of the kids that they cared about. And here's what they said to me. We have excellent music education, but what we need is the pedagogy of joy. That phrase has haunted me since. Boy, do our kids need the pedagogy of joy that accomplishes at high levels, as El Sistema work does, some of the best youth education, youth music programs in the world, and yet they insist on joy, and they have developed a pedagogy of joy. We know about the pedagogy of joy. We live in systems that don't much care about it. The people involved in our system do care about it, but our systems don't care about it. I hear them quietly whispering for us to do that. Instead of saying out loud, our schools need the pedagogy of joy, I hear all the individuals I work with in schools all but whispering that to me. Bring me the pedagogy of joy. Bring these children the pedagogy of joy. Because they know the impact on learning, on the feel of what follows, and on making stuff you care about. I want to end with a few quotations. Two of them are extremely pretentious, and you have to forgive me for that. The first one is the worst, because that is a quote from me. And unless I read this quote, I always botch it. So let me get my own quote. My goodness. Can I? Oh, wait, here it is. It fell. Here we go. All right, so this is from the book, The Everyday Work of Art, which is available for sale at the back table. A significant proportion of your purchase price will go to the New Hampshire Arts Learning Network, so go snap them up. Here's the quote. People are shaped by what they extend themselves into. We must be very careful with the objects we present to ourselves and to our children because we are changed by them. Art lends shape to yearning. Art is the best container for yearning because it is so rich, so human, so satisfying on so many levels. Art lends serious outer shape to serious inner yearning. And if these yearnings are informed by less rich objects, they go to sleep, they die, or eventually fill the pages of the daily newspaper. This may be the most important sentence I say this morning. We are in the yearning business. Our job is to wake up the yearning in young people who function in systems and in a culture that diabolically squelches it in every way it can, to wake up that yearning and guide it into experiences wherein they discover the pleasures of yearning and the courage for pouring themselves into making stuff they care about and the courage to believe the world wants to receive what they have made. That's our job number one. These are tools to accomplish it. And it's not just me who says that. Pretentious quote number 2 comes from Plato. And he said there is one thing above all a society must accomplish if it's going to succeed. And that one thing a society must accomplish doesn't have to do with governance, doesn't have to do with economies. The single thing it must do is teach its young people to find pleasure in the right things. And there is no right thing than making stuff you care about and sharing it with others. I want to end on a note of reality, and it's a note of thanks, recognizing that all the high, aspiring, lofty aspirations I have shared with you for this hour are not supported by the institutions we work in that do not desperately care about the delicate tendrils of yearning in the young in their buildings. In fact, they are diabolically designed to squelch just about everything I've talked about for the last hour. And so I see your work as an act of courage to sustain this high aspiration while dealing with the difficulties and limitations of the institutions within which we work, and sustaining a balance so that you don't get so fried from these that you lose that aspiration in your 80%, or you don't become so aspiring and high-minded up here that you lose your effectiveness in the daily institutions we function within. So I want to end with a stanza of a poem by Robert Frost that captures this balance, this balancing act that we engage in. And the stanza goes like this. It's the last stanza of the poem, Two Tramps in Mud Time by Robert Frost. It goes like this. But yield who will to their separation. My object in living is to unite my avocation and my vocation as my two eyes make one in sight. Only where love and need are one, and the work is play for mortal stakes, is the work ever really done for heaven and the future's sakes. Thank you.